What is this?
Sister Blessing, that jacket is mine. Please. Please.
I know whose jacket it is.
It is not what you are thinking. Let us not do this here. This is a burial.
Then tell me, Pastor, how did my wedding ring get into your pocket?
I can explain.
No. You will explain to God.
The ring had been gone for exactly 93 days. Blessing knew, because she had counted. She had counted the way a woman counts the days after a loss she cannot explain. Quietly, privately, in the back of her mind where she kept the things that did not yet make sense. She had looked everywhere. She had turned the bedroom inside out twice. She had checked the kitchen, the bathroom, the space between the car seats, the lining of every handbag she owned. She had prayed over it. She had wept over it. And when her husband David told her with a calm face and steady eyes that it must have slipped off somewhere, that she was always removing it when she washed dishes, that she needed to be more careful with valuable things, she had believed him because he was her husband. Because she had given him 12 years of her life and her trust had never once been called into question. Because the man who slept beside her every night, who prayed with her every morning, who sat in the front row of Redemption Word Assembly every Sunday with his Bible open and his voice raised in worship, that man could not be hiding something from her. That was what she believed. Until the day she put her hand into Pastor Emmanuel's jacket pocket at a burial ceremony in Enugu, and she felt something cold and round and deeply familiar between her fingers. It had started the way most disasters start in a marriage, slowly and then all at once. The home prayer session was in February. Pastor Emmanuel had come personally, which was unusual. He was not the kind of pastor who made house visits often. He had 3 assistant pastors for that. But David had called him directly, and he came on a Tuesday evening with his Bible and his anointing oil and his big warm voice that made every room feel like a sanctuary. Blessing had cooked. She had set out drinks and made sure the children were bathed and in bed before the adults settled into prayer. It was a long session. 2 hours of intercession, of worship, of the pastor laying hands and speaking in tongues over every corner of the house. When it was done, Blessing felt light. She felt the particular peace that comes after genuine prayer, and she had gone to bed that night feeling that her home was covered. She noticed the ring was gone 3 days later. She did not panic immediately. She retraced her steps. She asked David if he had seen it. He said no, but his eyes moved to the window when he answered, and she filed that somewhere without knowing she was filing it. She searched for 2 weeks before she finally accepted that it was gone and allowed herself to cry. David held her while she cried. He rubbed her back and told her they would replace it, that a ring was just a symbol, that what mattered was what it represented. She thought it was the kindest thing he had said to her in months. She did not yet understand that kindness can be a disguise. 93 days later, she was at the burial of Deacon Okafor's mother in Akunanau, and she was helping Pastor Emmanuel's wife, Sister Chioma, arrange pastor's things before the graveside service began. The pastor had come straight from a speaking engagement in Onitsha, and his second suit jacket, the one he would change into for the graveside, was folded in a bag that Chioma asked Blessing to hold while she attended to something. When Blessing shook the jacket open to fold it properly, she felt the weight in the left breast pocket. She assumed it was a pen or a phone. She reached in to move it so the jacket would hang cleanly. Her fingers closed around a gold band. She did not pull it out immediately. She stood there with her hand inside a dead man's burial ceremony, inside her pastor's jacket pocket, and she felt her entire understanding of the last 93 days shift like ground before an earthquake. She pulled it out slowly. She turned it over. She did not need to read the inscription inside because she knew the weight of it, knew the exact width of the band, knew the small imperfection on the left side where it had knocked against the pot handle years ago and never been perfectly smooth again. It was her ring. It was absolutely, completely, without any question, her ring. She put it in her own pocket. She folded the jacket. She handed it back to Sister Chioma with a steady face and quiet hands, and she stood through the entire burial service without her legs giving way. She sang when the congregation sang. She bowed her head when they prayed. She greeted people when it was over. She rode back to Enugu in the church bus, and she looked out the window the whole way, and she did not say a single word to anyone.
Inside, she was on fire. She did not confront David that night. This surprised even her. She had always been the kind of woman who could not hold things in, who needed to speak, who processed pain by releasing it. But something in her had gone very still and very cold and very deliberate. She recognized the feeling. It was the feeling of a woman who understands that she is in a fight she did not start, against people who had been planning longer than she had, and that her only advantage was that they did not know she knew. She kept that advantage like a weapon she was not yet ready to use. She began to watch instead. She watched David's phone habits, the way he tilted the screen, the way he sometimes stepped outside to take calls. The certain notifications made his jaw tighten for just a second before his face relaxed back into normal. She watched the household accounts. She had always left the finances mostly to David, trusting him with the joint account, handling only the household groceries and the children's school fees from her own teacher's salary. Now she looked. She looked carefully, and what she found made her sit down on the kitchen floor in the middle of the afternoon and press her hand over her mouth. Money was moving, slowly, in amounts small enough not to alarm, but consistently. Over the past 8 months, more than 3 million naira had left the joint account in transfers she did not recognize. Some went to account numbers she could not trace. One transfer, 250,000 naira, went to a name she recognized immediately. Emmanuel Okeke, her pastor's full name. She went to see Sister Chioma on a Thursday. She did not go with accusations. She went with her ring. She placed it on the table between them, and she watched Chioma's face, and what she saw there was not surprise. What she saw was something worse, recognition and shame, and the particular expression of a woman who has been sitting on a secret that has been burning her from the inside. Chioma broke within 20 minutes. What came out was this. David had approached Pastor Emmanuel 6 months ago with a plan. He had met someone, a woman in Abuja, younger, from a wealthier family, who had given him an ultimatum. He wanted out of his marriage, but he wanted to exit with as much as possible. He had been systematically moving money and valuables out of the matrimonial home. The ring was one of several items he had asked the pastor to keep or sell on his behalf. Pastor Emmanuel had agreed. Not for greed alone. David had been one of the church's biggest financial contributors, and Emmanuel had convinced himself he was helping a man find happiness, that blessing would be fine, that God would provide for her. He had taken the transfers as reimbursement for his trouble. Chioma had found out 2 months ago. She had confronted her husband. He had promised to stop. He had not stopped, and she had been living with it ever since, carrying it like a stone in her chest, too afraid to speak and too ashamed to stay silent. She wept at the table. Blessing did not weep with her. Blessing sat straight in her chair and asked every question she needed to ask and listened to every answer, and when she left that house, she had everything she needed. She spent the next 3 weeks moving carefully. She opened a personal account at a different bank. She transferred her salary there from the next payment. She photocopied every financial document she could access, account statements, the property documents for the house in Engu that was in both their names, the land David had purchased in Lekki that she had not known about until she found the agreement in the back of his wardrobe while he was at work. She took pictures of everything. She called her brother in Port Harcourt, who was a lawyer, and she told him everything. And he came to Engu the following weekend under the cover of a family visit, and they sat in her kitchen long after the children slept, and he told her exactly what her rights were and what her next steps should be. She did not touch the joint account. She did not remove her ring from the pocket where she had kept it every day since the burial. She did not change anything in her behavior towards David. She cooked his food. She sat beside him in church. She laughed at his jokes in front of the children. She became the best actress she had never trained to be. She was waiting for the right moment. It came on a Sunday. Redemption Word Assembly's annual Thanksgiving service was the biggest Sunday of the church calendar. The auditorium on Ogui Road held over 1,000 people when it was full, and on Thanksgiving Sunday it was always full. The choir was in full voice. The ushers wore white and gold. The decorations were elaborate. Pastor Emmanuel was at his most polished, new suit, new shoes, his voice carrying to every corner of the building with the authority of a man who had convinced himself he was still right with God. David sat in the front row as he always did. Blessing sat beside him as she always did. The children sat between them. From the outside, they were the picture of a family covered and whole. Blessing had spoken to the head of the church's board of trustees the previous Wednesday. She had shown him the account statements. She had shown him the transfers to the pastor's personal account. She had shown him the documents her brother had reviewed. The trustee was a retired judge named Chief Mwosu, and he had sat behind his desk
and read everything twice before he looked up at her with an expression that told her he believed every word. He had made some calls of his own. So when the Thanksgiving service reached the moment of open testimony, when Pastor Emmanuel called on members to come forward and share what God had done, Chief Mwosu stood up instead of a regular member. And when he reached the microphone, he did not give a testimony. He gave a report. Calm, detailed, precise. The transfers, the stolen valuables, the scheme to strip a faithful church member of her assets before discarding her. He named David. He named Pastor Emmanuel. He laid everything out in front of 1,000 people with the steady voice of a man who had spent 40 years in courtrooms and was not afraid of silence. The auditorium went completely still. Then it erupted. Pastor Emmanuel did not finish the service. The board of trustees asked him to step down from the pulpit immediately, and he did. He walked off that stage with his head low and his shoulders bent, and he looked for the first time like the size of what he had actually done. David sat in the front row and did not move for a long time. The woman beside him, his wife, the woman he had been planning to discard, stood up, took her children's hands and walked out of that church without looking back at him once. She did not run. She did not shout. She walked like a woman who had already done the hardest part and was now simply collecting what was hers. The months that followed were not easy. Blessing had known they would not be. Divorce proceedings in Nigeria are never clean, and David fought the process with the energy of a man who had only just realized how much he stood to lose. But her brother was her lawyer, and the documents she had gathered were airtight, and the court in Enugu had a female judge who read every page with careful eyes and made her rulings without sentiment or delay. Blessing kept the house, she kept the children, she received a settlement that included a portion of the Lekki land. She kept her job at the school in Independence Layout where she had taught for 9 years and where her colleagues who had heard everything because this was Enugu and nothing stayed private long, treated her with a quiet respect that felt better than pity. She moved her ring from her pocket back to her finger. Then she thought about it for one full day and moved it off again permanently and put it in a small box in her drawer. Not because she was ashamed of what it had meant, but because she was not the same woman who had worn it, and she did not want to carry the old version of herself on her hand anymore. David came first. He came 4 months after the divorce was finalized on a Saturday morning when the children were at her mother's. He had lost the Abuja woman. She had left him when the money troubles began, which surprised nobody except David himself. He stood at Blessing's gate in a shirt that was not pressed and eyes that were not steady, and talked for a long time about mistakes and reflection and the things the man does not understand until he has lost them. Blessing listened from the other side of the gate. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she told him she forgave him. She said it simply, and she meant it, not because he deserved it, but because she had learned in the last several months that forgiveness is not a gift you give someone else. It is a thing you do for your own chest so it does not stay heavy. She forgave him, and then she told him to go. He stood at the gate for a little while longer, as if waiting for something more. She went inside and closed her front door, and he eventually left.
Pastor Emmanuel came 6 months later. His church had removed him from leadership following an investigation by the board that confirmed everything Chief Nwosu had presented on Thanksgiving Sunday. He had lost his pulpit, his standing, and a significant portion of his congregation. Sister Chioma had stayed, which Blessing found both surprising and quietly sad. But the marriage was visibly broken, and everyone who knew them could see it. Emmanuel came to Blessing's house on a weekday afternoon, and he stood in her sitting room and wept in the way that large men weep, with something almost frightening in its size. He spoke about God and failure and the moment a man chooses wrongly and cannot go back. He said sorry more times than she could count. She gave him water. She sat across from him. She let him finish. Then she told him the same thing she had told David, that she forgave him, that carrying his guilt was not her assignment, and that she hoped he would find his way back to whatever honest version of himself existed before he made the choices he made. She meant all of it. She showed him to the door. She closed it behind him. She stood in her hallway for a moment, in the particular silence of a woman who has closed the last chapter of a story that almost finished her. Then she went to the kitchen and started cooking dinner for her children. Blessing did not become a millionaire. She did not start a business that went viral or buy a mansion that made her enemies weep. Her life after the storm was not a movie. It was quieter than that and truer than that. She woke up every morning in a house that was hers. She drove her children to school in a car that was hers. She taught her students with the particular patience of a woman who understands what it means to be underestimated. On Sundays, she found a small church in Asata with a female pastor and a congregation that minded its business, and she sat in the back row and lifted her hands and meant every word she sang. She was not unbroken. She was something better. She was a woman who had been broken all the way down, had looked at every piece of herself on the floor, and had chosen, slowly, deliberately, without applause, to put herself back together in a shape that was stronger than the original. Her children grew. Her classroom filled every September. Her brother visited often, and they laughed loudly in her kitchen. Her mother stayed for long weekends and called her strong in Igbo, which felt better than any English word for it. She never replaced the wedding ring. She did not need to. What she carried now was worth more than gold and heavier than any band. It was the quiet, unshakable knowledge of a woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side still herself, still whole, still here. And that, she understood now, was the only ring that mattered. If your pastor betrayed your trust, would you forgive him and move on, or would you never step foot in that church again? Drop your answer in the comments. If this story touched you, please Please like and subscribe, share it with someone who needs it today, and drop a comment. We want to hear from you. God bless you.